There's a creative depletion cycle that everyone goes through. And in this video, we're going to talk about how it works, why it repeats, and how to break it. And so this is typically what happens. You finish a project, you're tired, but that's normal. Creating takes effort. Putting your ideas and visions into material form takes something out of you. And a little fatigue after a big delivery makes complete sense. But the next project starts. And you bring with you a bit of fatigue that happened from the first project. And now the fatigue is layering on. Project finishes, you start the next one, and now you're operating with fatigue you've accumulated over the last two projects. And so we've been layering in this fatigue in the system. And it's heavy and it's dense and it makes us feel sluggish and we're not as motivated. And it's hard to move around. And so it's like a dull knife that has been overused so many times that hasn't sharpened itself back up. And at some point, you realize you can't quite remember when the tired stopped being from the last project and just started being about everything you're doing. That baseline shifted, and the new normal is being tired. And what used to feel like normal now feels like something you're trying to get back to. And burnout isn't a specific moment in time where it just switches. Burnout accumulates over time. It's only when we break and we have a striking moment, a crash, a breakdown, that we realize it's not working for us anymore. And so today I want to show you exactly how the creative depletion cycle works, why it keeps repeating, because without understanding this cycle, we're doomed to repeat it, and how to actually break it. So if you watched my last video, you heard me talk about the difference between survival mode and source creation, and why rest alone doesn't fix creative burnout. And so this video is going to go a level deeper, actually a few levels deeper, and we're going to look at the actual cycle and the specific pattern that keeps creative professionals stuck and the mechanisms to break the cycle. Whether you've watched the previous video or not, we're going to start from the beginning. Here's what the creative depletion cycle actually looks like. And I want you to track yourself as I describe this, because most people don't recognize when they're in a cycle. They think that burnout is a separate event or something that comes at a really pivotal moment. It starts with incubation, a new project, a new idea, a new client, and there's this genuine excitement, inspiration. You feel the momentum and you want to run with it, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. And this phase feels so good, and it's why we do the work. Then comes this burst. You give everything to the project, you focus your creativity, your best thinking, no boundaries around energy. Give, 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 because the project deserves everything you have, and you're in it. Then comes the production. This is the reality check of bringing that idea into the world, and it's similar to the valley of death. This is how I used to teach it in design school. And problems and obstacles arise, late nights, conflicting feedback, and they just drain your passion. But you keep pushing through because you're a professional. And then comes the delivery. The project is done, the client loves it, and by all external measures, it's a success. And then the crash comes. And it's not that dramatic kind of crash. It's that quiet kind. The kind where you're just a little flat, a little empty. You tell yourself, I just need the weekend. You rest, you come back, and within a day or two, you kind of feel that flatness again. That same grit and grind is back, and it's starting to set in the body. And so you tell yourself, this is just how it goes. This is what it takes. This is the industry. A little recovery time after a big push. You reload. New project comes in. Incubation of inspired energy, burst of creating. Except this time, and this is the part most people miss, you don't start from full. You don't start from a full well of energy. You start from where your last project left you. That means each cycle starts with slightly less than you being full. The recovery never gets you back to the same baseline as when you first started, and the fatigue from the last project is still there, just below the surface. And now this new project's excitement starts to mask it until the delivery comes and the crash is a little bit deeper than the last time. And this accumulation, this is how creative professionals end up years into a career feeling like shells of themselves. not because one catastrophic burnout, but because of dozens of small ones that were never fully recovered from. I remember the exact moment I first felt this, even though I didn't have the language for it at the time. I was about 9 months into building my first business. I had a full-time job. I was freelancing on the side, trying to build something of my own, all simultaneously. I was doing what I do, and I was living life on my own terms. I pushed, I hustled, and I was betting on myself. One night, I was coming home late. It was about midnight after working a full day, and I went to the fridge to get a snack to eat because I was starving, and I just started crying. I just felt completely depleted and empty and at this bottom pit after trying to build and build and build, and there was nothing I could do. And it was at the very beginning of things that lasted a lot longer. And it wasn't because I had a bad day or anything that went wrong. I was just tired. I was up early and I knew I had to do it all over again. I knew I was starting to kick up this really heavy amount of work. And I was just dragging and dragging the burnout I had from the previous gigs to the table. So I wasn't starting on a full tank. I wasn't starting with, I wasn't really starting with a lot of full creative energy to do all of it. And I did it anyway. And what I remember most was this specific feeling that the thing that I had set out to build, the freedom I was trying to create, had become a trap. I had made moves I couldn't undo. I had obligated myself that I just could, like, I had contracts, I had things set up, and I had commitments I couldn't walk away from. And the only way out I thought was through. So that's what I kept telling myself. Keep going, it'll all work out. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. The light at the end of the tunnel is real. It would be another 5 years before that chapter finally ended. 5 years of keeping going, 5 years of cycle repeating itself, 5 years of new projects starting from a slightly less reserve than the one before, 5 years of ingraining in my body that this is just the new normal. And that's the dangerous part of this cycle. It's very compatible with external excess, especially when you get validated and praised for all of that work. There's just this connection we make that this is the way to go. And I was playing the game in the machine and I looked successful doing it. But I was slowly depleting myself at a fundamental level. And because the external world kept saying, this looks successful, it just kept reinforcing to keep going. So why the cycle repeats? So why does this keep happening? Why do smart, self-aware, deeply committed creative professionals keep ending up in the same place? Here's what I've come to understand after 25 plus years in this industry and years of studying what's actually happening underneath. We repeat this cycle because we adopted the belief that the burnout is part of the process. And then we ingrained that by repeating it over and over again. Think about how burnout is talked about in creative industries. It's almost a badge. You worked yourself to exhaustion. That means you cared. That means you were serious. Rest is for people, the idea that you'll sleep and rest when you die. The idea that rest is for people that can afford rest. That recovery happens in between the real work. And the conventional conversations around burnout, they're almost always physical. Drink more water, go for walks, take vacations, get more sleep, which, yes, of course, all of those things matter, but they're only treating the physical symptoms. And there's something much deeper than that. And because creative burnout is not primarily a physical problem, it's emotional, it's mental, it's spiritual, and we don't know how to talk about all of the layers because they're harder to quantify, harder to prescribe, and in professional environments, they just make people uncomfortable. So we reach for the physical fixes. They're easy to explain, they're easy to fix, and the physical fixes help temporarily. But then the cycle repeats again. And so here's what's actually happening underneath the physical symptoms. The emotional layer, the unprocessed feelings from project to project, from client to client, from creative disappointment to creative disappointment, those don't go away because you took a vacation. They accumulate. They sit in the body and they make the next creative session heavier before it began because we tend to carry that emotional baggage and that emotional weight into it. Because we haven't resolved it, we take it with us to the next project. The mental layer, the self-doubt, the inner critic, the constant evaluation of whether the work is good enough, whether we're good enough, whether we're bringing value. That doesn't rest when you rest. It runs in the background. It's running right now for most of you. It's running when you're laying on the couch. It's running when you're scrubbing through social media. And then we have the spiritual layer. And I use this word very carefully because I don't mean it religiously at all. This is the connection you have with yourself and the work. This is something at a deeper level that makes magic happen in creativity. And it's that sense of you, and it's that sense of what you're making matters. The feeling of being tapped into something larger that's helping you drive the creative that is larger than a deadline, larger than client feedback, something that brought you into the profession to begin with. And when that goes quiet, you can still produce, but you're producing from a much shallower place. And these three layers are almost entirely absent from the conversation on creative burnout. And their absence is why the cycle repeats. And we fix the surface, but we always leave the root untouched. And so the first mechanism to break the depletion cycle. So if rest doesn't break the cycle, if stabilizers manage the depletion without touching the pattern underneath, what actually does? And so the first mechanism is the one most people tend to skip entirely because it's not complicated, because it happens before the intervention is even possible. And the first mechanism is recognition in real time, not in retrospect. Most creative professionals understand the depletion cycle after the fact. You crashed, you look back, you trace the thread. Yes, you were stretched too thin. Yes, the session should have stopped 2 hours earlier. In the morning, the body was signaling something and you opened up the laptop anyway. The retrospect understanding is real and it's important, but it almost does nothing to change the cycle because the cycle doesn't live in the past, it lives in the present moment. It's in the specific 10 seconds when you're deciding whether to absorb the scope of expansion, answer the message at 10 p.m., push through the session, even though you already know you've done as much as you can. And that's where the cycle is either going to continue or it gets interrupted. And so most creative professionals are not present enough in the moment to recognize what's going on because there's so many other things that have their attention. And here's why. The depletion cycle runs on a very convincing story. And the story sounds responsible, professional, even admirable. Just finish this. It's only one more thing. It'll be real quick. The client needs it by tomorrow. I can reset after. I've done harder things than this before. I got this. That story is the cycle talking. That story is the genuine persuasion you give yourself and reinforce 1,000 times over. Every yes that's absorbed, every signal that's overwritten, every time you push through the work just to get it delivered and nothing catastrophic happened, the nervous system learned we can survive this, and this is what we do to thrive. This is what success looks like. So that story, when it arrives with full authority because it has receipts. We take the external validation and we say, see, this is how it works. And without recognition, without taking that moment, without the full capacity to identify the story as a story rather than truth, the automatic response fires in the body before a conscious decision has been made. The cycle doesn't continue because you choose it. It continues because you didn't recognize the moment you had to choose. So recognition changes that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but specifically the moment you can feel the familiar signature in your body before that automatic response fires off, something different becomes possible. And what that signature feels like is going to be different for everybody, but it's always physical. For some, it could be a jaw tightening, something that happens before you say yes to something and your body already knows it's a no. For some, it could be the shoulders. I was always really like this. My shoulders would be up in my neck and I have no idea because I was typing on the keyboard. Taking the pause allows me to change my posture. And so there's a way that we can identify that. For some, it could be a tension in the chest. It could be heart fluttering. It could be a lot of thoughts racing. You're going to Pay attention to the signals in your body and figure out which signature is yours. But I can tell you that it exists. Your body is giving you signs and letting you know and communicating if it's been firing before you say yes to something and you override that consistently. You may have stopped noticing that it was even there to begin with. Recognition means learning the signature before the override happens. Not so you can force a direct response, not yet, just so you know that you're in the moment. And that's all you need right here, right now. This is where the cycle either continues or begins to change. That 10 seconds of awareness of knowing what's happening in the body before automatic responses fire is the entire first mechanism. Because you can't interrupt a pattern you haven't recognized as a pattern. So once you can feel it in real time, once the signature is familiar enough that it registers information rather than just noise, the pause becomes possible. The pause becomes data, not automatic, possible. And possibly this is where everything starts from. The second mechanism. So recognition gives you the moment. The second mechanism is what to do with it. And so this is where the intervention advice gets it wrong. That instinct, once you've recognized you're in the cycle, is to immediately redirect it, to make a better decision, say no where you should have said yes, hold a boundary before the performing self overrides it. And that's moving a little too fast. Not because the redirection is wrong or it's not good advice, but because the nervous system needs time to support you in the decision you're about to make. And so here's what I mean. The automatic response that drives the depletion cycle isn't just a habit. This is a nervous system prediction. The body has learned through thousands and thousands of reps that you've given it that compliance keeps the threat at bay. That means by saying yes and absorbing the extra work and pushing through those signals is what keeps the client happy, the relationship safe, and the professional identity intact. And your body's used to that, even though it's heavy. That response fires faster than conscious decision making. You're so used to doing it. And when you try to override it with a new decision without first giving your nervous system any evidence that the response that you want to give that's different is also survivable. The automatic response is always going to win every time, not because your willpower is weak, because you're trying to make a new choice while the body is still running a very old program. So let me give you an example. You want to put in a boundary, but you're not comfortable with it yet. You have to take the pause before you can make the action so that you can sit with it and get comfortable in the uncomfortable, because that has a meaning to it when you put in a boundary. You have to let your body catch up to the decisions that you've been making. The second mechanism is a pause, not the decision, not the redirection, the pause. The 10 seconds, sometimes less, between the moment of recognition and the automatic response, in that 10 seconds, take a breath, and like a real deep breath, not a performance breath, one breath that is deliberately slow and slower than the pace of the movement. And that's it. And what we want to do is have recognition so that we can build space to make the decision. And that's it. The second mechanism isn't making the decision, it's giving yourself space. It's not trying to figure out a strategy. It's not a boundary setting script. It's one breath, but it's an intentional breath. And this matters physiologically because the breath is the only part of the automatic nervous system that you can consciously control. So everything else, the heart rate, the cortisol release, the activation of the threat response happens automatically. You can't think your way or decide your way out of that process, but you can breathe differently to allow signals to your body to tell it that you're safe, to relax and calm down. And this deliberateness of slowing the breath sends a very direct message to the nervous system that the threat is not as alarming as it originally was, that the threat is not a threat. It's not eliminated, but it's reduced down even slightly. And that reduction, that fractional shift in the threat response is what creates the space. And that space is where the conscious response becomes possible, not just the automatic one. The pause is not the solution. The pause is the condition which the solution can be chosen in. And so here's what the pause begins to teach the nervous system over time through repetition, not through understanding, is that there is a space between the trigger and the response. That space exists if we can recognize the trigger before we respond, and it's survivable. And nothing catastrophic happens in this pause. 10 seconds, 30 seconds, even a minute if you needed to take for breathing. And every time you pause, even when you ultimately might still say yes, even when the automatic responses fire anyway, you're giving the nervous system a data point and you're putting a different response and letting your body know that the world is not ending. And over time, those data points accumulate. It's survivable. Nothing catastrophic happens in the pause. And every time you pause, the cycle breaks. Slowly, incrementally, one pause at a time begins to ease and give you space to decide what's next. And that's mechanism two, not a decision, but a breath. And the beginning of evidence that space exists to make a clear one. The third mechanism. Repetition shows you the moment. The pause creates the space. The third mechanism is what changes the default. And the third mechanism is the one that requires the most honesty because it's slower than anyone wants and it's more mundane than any narrative about transformation will allow. And the third is repetition. And it's not dramatic repetition, not the intensive weekend workshop kind or the retreat that promises you shift in 4 days, and just daily repetition. The same small practice in the same window, in the same ordinary conditions across days, weeks, and months. And here's why nothing else works at the level the depletion cycle lives. This cycle is encoded in your nervous system as a groove between your neural pathways in your brain and the ways that we've reinforced it in the body. And because it's happened so many times as a default, think of all the years and all the cycles you've been through. The body takes it automatically because it's the path most worn. Not because it's the best one, it's because it's the one that we've traveled most often. And so survival mode creation has had years of daily reinforcement. Every morning when you opened a laptop and you felt like the heart fluttering and the panic in the stomach, every session that began with the tight shoulders and your jaw already clenched, every deadline that you absorbed into your body and all the feedback and the drama, we've adopted that this is what creating feels like, thousands of repetitions, and that groove is deep. And the only thing that changes the deep groove of wearing is a different groove that we have to build. And it's not through intensity, it's through dailiness. 5 minutes every day before the work begins. Not a meditation practice, not a spiritual discipline, a very specific, physical, repeatable sequence that does one thing. And it just shifts the state from where we begin. The jaw releases before we open the laptop. The shoulders drop and relax before we, open up the first file. And it's one question that we really ask the body, not the mind, before the session begins, which is, where am I? Right? I'm checking in. I'm taking that moment with self. And that sequence practiced every day does something very specific over time. In the first week, you might notice that it creates one moment per day that just feels a little bit different than being in survival mode. And that baseline might start to shift for brief moments where you feel like, where it starts to feel real. In the first month, the nervous system has now learned to expect this transition. I take a deep breath, I open up my laptop, I close my laptop at the end of the day, I take another deep breath, and I put it away. And the shift happens faster because now we're building familiarity in the body, in the breath. And the body begins to recognize this practice as a signal that this is a different state, and the state is available to us when we work. And you keep compiling that and you keep adding on that. And in 3 months, you're going to notice a shift in the baseline. Not completely, not permanently. Everyone's on their own time frame and how they work. Might even happen sooner, but it's measurable. Those sessions that began from survival mode are shorter. And we can return from survival and get into this source creation a lot faster because the body has been practicing returning. And so the groove is being worn in the other direction. We're rewiring our nervous system, our neural pathways, and we're saying that this is actually real. Like we're building that space in real time. This is how neurological change happens through repetition over time. And then it allows us to be able to have those insights in those single moments because we've given space to allow them to come in. Recognition and the pause are both real interventions. Only repetition will change the groove. And so here's something that most creative professionals may not want to hear. Creative professionals have spent years, decades performing and reinforcing these daily habits embedded in them. And changing the baseline requires the same consistency in the other direction. Not more intensity, not more discipline, more dailiness. Not a heroic session, the ordinary one, the done one, done in the conditions that are not optimal, when you don't feel like doing it, especially when you don't feel like doing it. Because the groove the depletion cycle runs on was built on days that you didn't feel like doing it anyway, and you still pushed through. And so we want to do that in a different direction. And you did it anyway. And the new groove gets built in the same way, one ordinary day at a time. And that's the whole mechanism. And that's the one that's actually going to change this cycle completely, day by day. And this is what actually changes what the nervous system does under pressure. Not once, but over time, permanently. Through mechanisms, recognition, learning to feel the cycle's signature in the body before the automatic response fires, the pause, one breath in 10 seconds between trigger and response, creating the space where a different choice becomes possible. And repetition, the daily practice, unglamorous and compounding, that wears the groove in the other direction until the different default is available. None of them dramatic, all of them real. Here's what I want to leave you with before we close. The depletion cycle is not an evidence of weakness. It is built into a system that makes us produce. It's not evidence of poor character or insufficient discipline. It's just something that the nervous system had learned early on in the career. That it's tied to output, that safety is tied to compliance, that the self that says no is the self that loses. And it's been running those stories on full automation ever since. You didn't design it that way. You just survived it. And that's the difference. And the work of changing it isn't more discipline directed at the same pattern. It's giving the nervous system enough evidence and course correction over time that a different way is possible. It's just not familiar yet. And that's longer than a weekend. That's longer than a vacation. But it's not as hard as another decade of repeating the same cycle and burnout. If you want to know where your nervous system actually is right now, which phase of the burnout cycle you're in, where you're at in the depletion arc, and what the right next steps for you is exactly where you're at, I built a creative burnout quiz pinned in the description box below. It's free. It takes a few minutes, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know that's specific to where you're at. And that's a starting point. If you've been watching this channel for a little while, and if these videos have been doing anything for you, especially if these mechanisms landed for you today, I'd like to invite you to join the waitlist for an upcoming program called Into the Creative Mystic. It's a 10-week program. We understand not just the mechanisms, but the journey that a creative goes through in its peaks, in its valleys, and ultimately the union of bringing it all together. It's seeped in body-based practices. It uses Evelyn Underhill's mysticism as a pathway, as well as the creative process on top and lived experiences. And so this is such a great way to really go back into finding and reconnecting with and remembering that source connection and creating. And the first cohort starts September 1st. The waitlist is now open. Either way, you now have a map to help you break this cycle. The cycle has a structure, it has mechanisms, and it can be interrupted and rebuilt. Now you know, and that's not a small thing. Thank you for being here. I love you all, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.